All right, welcome to Basics of Biblical Hebrew, chapter 14a. Why 14a? It's because we're not going to be able to cover everything in 14, even though pages-wise in the grammar, it's not all that long. We want to make sure we cover weak verbs pretty thoroughly. So we're just going to get partway through it, and we'll pick up and do the rest of it on the next lesson. So we'll start off with Hebrew Insights. That too will be continued in the next week. I'll explain that later. Then we'll go over the workbook, see if there's any questions. We'll go over the translations, and then we'll start looking at call perfect weak verbs and go over the vocabulary. That's the plan. So for the Hebrew Insight, we want to talk about shamar. Shamar is a pretty cool word. It's used 469 times in the Old Testament, and it's translated various ways, like keep. We know that we're to keep the Ten Commandments. We are to keep God's word. And we generally understand this to be something like obey. However, shamar is really much broader than that. When you start seeing all the ways shamar is used, we see that it is much more than simple obedience. It's to keep or to watch or to guard or preserve or protect. It's uh, it's a much broader word than just keep. Keep in the sense of guarding or overseeing. In 1 Samuel 28:2, the bodyguard is the one keeping or guarding my head. There are other words that are also built on the same root letter. So we can see shamar with the comets hey there. You can see the root there in Psalm 77:5. It's actually a reference to the eyelids, the keepers of the eyes, in with a mem on the front. In Genesis 42:17 and 19, it's actually referring to a guard or a jail. It can refer to a jail. It's a place of keeping, a place of keeping. And then the Shemurim and Exodus 12:49, again, you can see the roots here. That's the night watches. And then we have Ashmurah. It's a division of watch time in the night. And again, we see Shamar in there, simply of the Shurik vowel added to the three consonants. Mishmeret, we see that a lot, especially in regards to the priesthood. Mishmeret, I guess, again, we have Shamar here, but it's the mishmerit is the thing to be kept. So it's oftentimes translated as something like a responsibility or a duty, um, but it's something that's to be kept, something to be done. So this would be like referring to the priests, the duties of their priesthood. That the Levites had certain duties or responsibilities. The priests themselves, Aaron's descendants, had certain duties and responsibilities, and so we see Mishmeret, but Shamar is also a part of that. And next time we will take this new information on Shamar and look at the word as it's used in Psalm 121. So to be continued. So were there any questions on the workbook for chapter 13? Okay, I hear none. So let's move to the Bible translation, which will be on page 51. We only have 6. So let's go through these woodenly. So number one, malak. Notice the comets and the patak there. So we know that is a verb, not a noun. But it looks like king, but as a verb, it's going to mean he reigned. And there's nothing on the back of it, no subformative, or we haven't studied imperfects. There's no preformative on the front either. So this is going to be a third masculine singular. All right. So he reigned, God. So this is good Hebrew word order. We have the verb first and then the subject. So God reigned over nations, goyim, nations. Uh, God, he sat, or he sat rather, he sat on the throne of the holiness of him. So you could say God reigned over nations, he sat on the throne of his holiness, or you could say God reigned over nations, he sat on his holy throne. on his holy throne. Either one of those would work. My wooden way would just be on the throne of his holiness. The holiness of him. You see that Holam Vav at the end of um, show. Uh, that's the third masculine singular pronominal suffix. Number two, Patak T. Notice the T at the end. That's first person singular. I trusted. I trusted Bechesed, in the loving kindness of, in the steadfast love of, in the tender mercies of Elohim, God, Olam, forever. I trusted in the loving kindness of God forever. Number three, this, again, Yada T. We see the T ending, that's first person singular. This I knew, or I know. I'd still say knew because it's perfect. It's a completed action. This I knew that God for me. We're going to have to, that's a verbless clause. We're going to have to add it to be verbs. So we're going to say is. God is for me. This I know or knew that, or yeah, that God is for me. Number four, notice on the first word we have a patak, and there's in bayom, and the yod has a dagesh, and so that's the article. So it's going to be in the day, that one. So in that day, karat, he cut. Again, we have verb, subject, word order. He cut Yahweh. So Yahweh cut. It in this case is with Avram, Abram, the covenant, to say, to the seed of you I gave the land, this one. So in that day, Yahweh cut a covenant with Abram, saying, to you, to your seed, I gave this land. And number five, we see natati. Again, we have that T ending, and we know that that's going to be a first person singular. Let's see, I didn't point that out in number four. Let me back up to number four again. Well, karat, there's nothing on the front or at the back of karat, so it's the third masculine singular. He cut. Let's see. And then natati on the second line, we see the T ending, and that's first person singular. I gave. Okay, so back to five again. So we have natati again. So I gave. We probably would want to smooth it out in English and say I set, but we'll just stick with I gave the wooden way here first. And then the next word, to the face of you, but that's usually meaning before you. I set, or I gave before you. The day is usually today. We have the hey and the patak and the dagesh and yod, so that's the article, the day, but it also is used in the sense of today. So I gave before you today the livings and the good and the death and the evil or the calamity. So smoothing it out, we could say, I set before you today the lives or the livings, the good and death and calamity or evil. Ra is often used, and it should have said the calamity or the evil. Ra is often used in that sense of calamity. Something bad happens. That's even true in Greek. Somebody that's having it badly might be sick or something like that. Number six, key, because. And now we have kavod, kavada, and the comets hey ending there. That's going to be a third person feminine singular. She was heavy, because she was heavy, the work on the people with this. So because the work was heavy on this people. Why is it feminine? It's because work is feminine. Notice the comets hey on avodah, avodah, the work. It's feminine, so That's why she was heavy. It's because work is heavy. Because work is feminine. The work is heavy. Any questions on that? All right. Well, then the next thing we will start off with kind of a review of chapter 13, the perfect strong verbs review. So verbal stems, like we've talked about call, or other stems like me fall or he feel, those stems are actually telling us the voice and the action of the verb. So for the action, we have the options are simple, causative, or intensive. And then for voice, we have either active, passive, or reflexive. Active means the subject is doing it. He hid. He hid the he hid the present or something like that. He hid. That's active. Passive, he was hidden. It's happening to the subject. Reflexive would be he hid himself. So those are the examples of voice, active, passive, reflexive. And then the stems tell us if they wanted to convey passive, a passive causative verb, they'd use a hopeful to do that. If they want to do it a intensive passive, they'd use who. So that's how you use this chart. Um, that's why we have all these different stems, is to communicate the voice and action. But we are just concentrating now on the call. We're going to be on call for a while. We're going to be on call for next um, a number of chapters. I don't remember how many. So when we say it's a call perfect, call is telling us that it's active, simple action. Perfect is telling us that it's completed action. That's when we say a call perfect, that's what we're saying. It's completed, simple action in the active voice. All right, and then here's the paradigm that's in 13.5 in your books. This is the sequence they have it in. It goes from third person to second to first, singular, and then third, second, first, um, plural. This was difficult for me to learn, so I rearranged them. I sent you a PDF with this chart. The subformatives, notice that the 3MS is the only one who doesn't have a subformative, and all the rest of them do. When we go back to this order, we see the subformatives and everything except for the third masculine singular. And so let's just read through that again. Catalti, catalta, catalt, catal, catala, catalnu, cataltem, catalten, catalu. Notice that these two with the schwas, those are vocal schwas because this is a long A vowel. The comets, the little metheg there tells us that that's an A vowel. So it's an A vowel and a vocal schwa because the A vowel, the comets, is a long A. A schwa is only silent if it follows a short vowel. And so the subformatives, we have T, ta, and then T, because this is also, both of these are silent schwas, both schwas in a row. Of course, then there's nothing for the third masculine singular, and we have ah, nu, tem, ten, u. I didn't really memorize them separately, like just the subformatives. What I memorized was this order right here, just the perfects, going first, second, third, um, singular, and then first, second, third, plural in that sequence. So I guess I killed, you killed, to a man, or to a woman, you killed, he killed, she killed, we killed, y'all killed. This is men. Y'all killed. This is women, the feminine. They killed. And the first persons are common. First person is common, and the third person plural is common. When we get into the imperfects, there will actually be a third masculine plural and a third feminine plural. So there'll be two instead of this one when we get to the imperfects. Don't have to worry about that's not until chapter 15. Just kind of a heads up that that distinction is made later, but not in the perfect. It doesn't matter which sequence table you use. If you want to use the one in the book, that's fine. If you want to use the one that I sent out, that's also fine. Whatever is easiest for you. Whatever sequence you memorize them in, you want to make sure that you recognize the subformative and know which person and gender and number that it is. So what is it you need to know? If you're looking at Catal, there's the lexical form, he killed, okay? So what does the first person look like? Catalti, Catalti. And we have the T subformative on it. There's Catal and the T subformative. That's first person common singular. So what does the second masculine singular of Catal look like? Catalta, Catalta, because we have the ta ending. And the second person feminine singular, Catalt, Catalt, because both of these schwas are silent, Catalt. Okay? And you're going to look for that ta with the schwa. Okay, and the third masculine singular, well, that happens to be the lexical form. There's no subformative. So it's just Catal. The third masculine singular of Catal is Catal. Okay. Then the third feminine singular of Catal is Catala. Catala. We have that comet's hay ending for third feminine singular. And the one common first person common plural of Catal is Catalnu. Catalnu. And we have the new ending for first person plural. And the second person plural of Catal is Cataltem, with a tem ending, masculine, second masculine plural. And then for the third feminine plural of Catal is Catalten. Catalten with a ten ending. And finally, the third person common plural of Catal is Catalu, with a shurik at the end, Catalu. So those are the things you want to be able to recognize for sure. Which person, what gender, and what number for each of the subformatives. So with that review from last week, we'll go ahead and get into chapter 14, part A, looking at weak verbs. So learning objectives for this week, we want to be able to identify the call perfect weak verbs with guttural consonants. So the gutturals, we're specifically going to look at the call perfect one guttural, two guttural, and the three chet ayin verbs. So yes, those are all still gutturals. And we need to be able to recognize the three alepphs and the three hays, weak verbs. Or if you want to memorize it, you can, but I suggest that you just learn the rules so you can recognize the forms. As we go through and look at the charts in the book, you'll see that it's just not that difficult, that the subformatives do not change, or the change is minor. You lose a dagesh or something like that. They basically look the same. We'll look at that in a little bit. So first of all, we want to be able to identify call perfect weak verbs with guttural consonants. So it's going to be a little bit of review again. Will primarily be a review. Almost everything we do will be applying things we've already learned. One would be the call perfect strong verb paradigm that we learned in chapter 13, and we've looked at, and we'll look at it again. We want to be able to identify weak verbs, and we want to use the syllabification rules from chapter 3. So those are all things we've already studied. All we're going to do is apply them. We want to use the diagnostic method rather than have to rememorize everything every single time. It's just way easier to learn what changes. Memorize it once and learn what changes. So first of all, call perfect strong verb paradigm. And again, that's in 13.5 on page 131. You can memorize it in that sequence, or you can memorize it in the first, second, third person sequence. This is the one in the book. We'll run through this one again. Catalti, Catalta, Catalt, Catal, Catala, Catalnu, Cataltem, Catalten, Catalu. All right. Next, we want to remember about identifying weak verbs. Weak consonants affect the spellings of words. These letters often drop out. The yod, vav, nu, hey, those often will drop out of a word. And that makes it weak. Gutturals will make it weak. And that's aleph, hey, chet, ayin, and sometimes resh. And then biconsonantals, geminate verbs are also considered weak. And actually, we will go over those in the next lesson. We're not going to get that far today. Weak verbs can have weak consonants in the first position, or sometimes just called the R1, root one, R being root, the R1 or root one position. In this case, the ayin is a guttural. So that's a weak verb. Amad, he stood. They can be in the second position or R2. So we have the chet in this R2 position. Bachar, he chose. Be in the third root position, the R3. Matzah, we have the aleph in the third position, he found. Or you can have more than one guttural in a word. And so we have the ayin, Allah, and the hey. So it's a one root guttural and a it's a three root guttural. We actually give that a separate name, though. It's called the three hey. So he went up. So that's how we identify weak verbs. And then looking at the rules from chapter 3 on how we pronounce things, gutturals cannot take a vocal schwa. Okay, we learned that back in chapter 3, page 19. But they prefer a reduced A vowel. That also is in chapter 3, page 24. So we have a chet and a reduced patak vowel. That's what a guttural will prefer, is an A vowel. If the schwa is or a schwa is silent if the previous vowel is a short vowel. In most other circumstances, it's vocal. And that's also in chapter 3.6, pages 18 and 19. So the short vowels are the patak, ba, the segol, be, the hirik, bi, b, this is a comet's hatuf, so that's o, bo, and the shurik, oo, boo, ba, be, bi, bo, boo. Okay. Those are the short ones. The exception is whenever the schwa is at the end of the word, that's also silent, even if it doesn't follow a short vowel. And that's really the main rule about schwa you have to learn. It's silent if it follows a short vowel. Okay, so we want to look at the call perfect one guttural, two guttural, and three chet ayin paradigm. That's on page 143. And you can see right off that it's way easier to memorize the paradigm and then just apply it. So notice that on the right-hand column, there's our strong verb paradigm. Then you can memorize it in their third, second, first person order if you want to. But when you go, now let's keep an eye on that, but let's look at the first column, the one guttural column. Notice that all of these are exactly the same except for the second masculine plural and second feminine plural. And the only difference is whenever you look at, if you look at the right column, You have katal tem and katal ten. So you have vocal schwas. You have ayins here and a mod. Uh, and so they can't have a vocal schwa, so they turn into a reduced vowel, a reduced patak. And those are the only differences. If you go back through there, let's just stick with that second masculine plural, where the first one's got a little red um, indicator of a change. The differences are in red. But notice the tem and go on across the column there. Tem, 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 tem. They're exactly the same. Go down to the next line, second feminine plural. 10, 10, 10, 10. They're all exactly the same. You go back up to third masculine singular, the top row. Okay, there is no subformative. It's just the three letters every single time. Um, so notice that this just doesn't change much. The next line down, third feminine singular, ah, 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 ah. Next line down, ta, 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 ta. Next line down, you have the t, 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 t. No, and the schwa is silent. The first common singular, t, 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 t. The third common plural, oo, 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 oo. It's all the same. It's the same thing. Okay, let's look more at the second column. A little bit different because this is the two guttural. And again, they make there's only two differences. That's in the third feminine singular and the third common plural. And it's taken, it's where the schwas have become a reduced vowel uh, under the guttural. Again, we already looked at all the endings. Their endings are all the same all the way across. For the three chet ayin, there's only one difference. It's the patak under the ayin. But if you look at everything else, it's the same. So if you memorize the call perfect strong verb paradigm, it's very, very easy to recognize any of these and know what person, gender, and number they are. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to point out there. All of the differences between the call perfect strong and the one guttural and two guttural verbs are due to the fact that the gutturals cannot take a vocal schwa. There is one difference between the three chet ayin paradigm, and that's the second feminine singular, and the call strong perfect paradigm. You already know that gutturals prefer A-class vowels. So we discussed that, and this is also in this chapter mentioned in 14.3 on page 143. And we've seen other similar changes in the past. Here's shamat. That's shama is to hear, and this is the second person feminine singular talking to a woman. You heard, shamat. And here's katalt. You killed, talking to a woman, one woman. So it's second feminine singular, katalt. But we have a problem here. The schwa under the vocal schwa has to become an A vowel. All right, there's the vocal schwa. What should be, I'm I'm sorry, that is not a vocal schwa. I just said the whole thing wrong here. Both of those schwas are silent schwas, but we know that the gutturals prefer an A vowel. Okay, so you might consider doing shama'at, shama'at, but that's not what we have in the book. This isn't what happened here. Gutturals cannot take a vocal schwa. We learned that, but this is not a vocal schwa. So now we have an arrow here. This is not a vocal. Of course, this is not a vocal schwa either. But it follows a short vowel. The patak is a short A vowel. Patak is a short A vowel. It closes this syllable. So this is an open syllable. The second syllable's closed syllable because that schwa closes it. So vocal schwa follows a short vowel. The silent schwa closes a syllable. Reduced vowels only occur in open syllables. This is an open syllable. This should be a closed syllable. And in a sense, this reduced vowel would close it anyway. But you can't have this following a short vowel. That doesn't work. So, okay, there. It doesn't work. So it becomes shama'at. Still pronounced the same way if I go back to again. There. You pronounce it shama'at. It just This is just a shorter A vowel. But then we'll go to what it really looks like here. There, with a full patak. Shama'at. It's still pretty much pronounced the same way. You just wouldn't linger on that. You wouldn't linger on this patak as long. It would be equal in time with this one. The short A vowel is simply because it's easier to say an ayin or a chet with an A vowel. And we've seen this with other things. For instance, ruach. Ruach, that's easier to say that chet when you have the furtive patak there, ruach, spirit. Or another one we've seen is rakia, rakia, the firmament or the expanse, where you have, again, the furtive patak leading it. It's just easier to do the guttural sounds with an A vowel. All right. So if we looked at the one gutturals, two gutturals, and three chet ayin, now we want to look at the three aleph and three hey paradigms. And we're not going to go through and memorize them over again. We're just going to look and see what changes and diagnose these things. We can see the chart on page 144. So at the top of the page, the heading is actually the 14.4 is on page 143, but we don't have the chart till the very top of 144. But again, let's just go through and look at them. You see the three MS, third masculine singular, matzah, he found, or katal, he killed. The only thing is that patak lengthened to a comets. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit as to why this is. But if you look at the next line down, we see the comets hey ending. We see the tav comets ending. We see that when we had the tav shva ending on the strong side, we lose the shva. We'll talk about that too. Notice on this first common singular, we see the T ending on both of them. We lose a dagesh, it's still T. We have the shurik, u, third common plural, second masculine plural, still tem, tem. On second feminine plural, still ten, ten. For one common plural, it's still new and new. So the endings don't change, but we have some other things that do change. That's still, if you just memorize the call perfect strong paradigm, you have no problem looking at any one of these and knowing what the gender, number, and what the person, gender, and number are. Now we'll look at why some of these differences, because the aleph, of course, the aleph is a silent letter, and even when it has a shva, it has to be a silent shva, and well, we'll talk about that more. All the differences between the call perfect strong and the three aleph verbs are due to the fact that the aleph is silent. When the aleph is silent, they call it quiescent. It's a quiesce. It quiesces. It is silent. The silent shva under the quiescent aleph drops out. The short vowel before the quiescent aleph lengthens. That's where we're seeing the comets there. And then the dagesh lene after the quiescent aleph drops out. These are all rules we've seen. We're going to see them in specifically here next. So let's first look at how the silent shva drops out. The expected silent shva under the aleph is no longer necessary. Okay, why? Why is it not necessary? Well, what would this sound like? If you have an aleph with a silent shva, what sound does it make? Exactly, just like that. Nothing. It doesn't make any sound at all. Okay, so the short vowel before the quiescent aleph lengthens. When an aleph occurs without a vowel, it is not considered to be a consonant with reference to the rules of syllabification. Well, that was back in chapter 3.9. To compensate, the short vowel becomes a long vowel. So instead of matzata with a short vowel, the patak becomes matzata with a comets. It lengthens before the quiescent aleph. Notice there's nothing on, no schwa or anything under the aleph. So because of that, the vowel lengthens. And we see that in the chart. Why does it lengthen to compensate? The syllable is now open. And then lastly, the dagesh linne after the quiescent aleph drops out. A dagesh in a bekad kafat letter is a linne if preceded by a consonant. So that was in chapter 3, page 18. The silent schwa has 0 value. That was actually in chapter 2. A bekad kafat letter does not take a dagesh linne if it follows a long or short vowel. And so, okay, there it's the same thing. If it follows, does not take a dagesh if it's after a long or short vowel. So suffirmatives lose their dageshes. The tav with a dagesh becomes a tav without a dagesh. And in modern Hebrew, we pronounce those the same. And the old traditional pronunciation, this would be a T sound, and this one would be a TH sound. But in modern Hebrew, they're both T sounds. So it doesn't change in the pronunciation. We just don't have the dagesh there. Okay. Now we want to go to the 3-hey paradigm, and that is on page 145, just across the page. This one we see a little bit more going on. We see more red ink. There's more changes. Okay. But before I go back to my PowerPoint, one thing I want to notice here is bana and katal. Yeah, we have 2 comets, but we still don't have anything on the back. It's still obviously third masculine singular. And when we get on the third feminine singular, we still see the comet's hey in both the strong and in the 3-hey. Down to the next row in second masculine singular, we see the ta and the ta. Yes, we're missing a dagesh, but we still see ta there. It's still obviously second masculine singular. For second feminine, that's a little bit more tricky because we don't see the schwa there. So that one's a little bit tricky. On the first common singular, we see T is there. It does not have a dagesh, but we still have T for the first common singular. Then Banu, for the third common plural, we still see the shurik at the end. We'll talk about the other changes in a little bit. And then second masculine plural, we still see the tem subformative in both columns. Second feminine plural, we still see the ten subformatives in both columns. And for the first common plural, we still see nu in both columns. So again, if you memorize the call perfect paradigm, strong verb paradigm, it's very easy to go through and see how to understand these verbs when we run across them. Now let's look at some of the differences. All the differences between the call perfect strong and the 3-hey verbs are due to the fact that 3-hey verbs are really 3 yod verbs. You go, what? Well, we're looking at, that was like originally in an earlier version of Hebrew, they were 3 yods and they became 3-heys. There were some changes over time in Hebrew to identify, because it was written with no vowels, they began to add vowel letters to let you know that a vowel should be present, even though there's no vowels. When you see a hey, you knew there should be probably an a vowel there. When you see a vav, well, you knew there's probably going to be a u vowel or an o vowel there. And when you see a yod, there's very possible you're going to see an I vowel there, or a stegol or something. And so that's handy. Even when I was in Israel the last time and I was trying to read signs around as we were going around different places, and banners. We were there right before Passover and they had banners up for the Passover. And so I could look at it and say, okay, I see that hey probably has an A vowel associated with it. Here's a vav in the middle, probably either an O or U. And I was able to reassimilate or let's see, what would that be actually? Reverse engineer. I could reverse engineer the vowels back into it, just knowing that they started adding these things. So how come it changed from a 3 yod to a 3-hey? Probably to indicate a vowel when there were no vowels. So that's something that did happen in Hebrew. Okay, so what do we know about these letters, the yod and the hey? These are 3-hey verbs. They were originally 3 yod verbs. Well, these are part of the set of the yod, vav, nun, hey, the ones that drop out they drop out. There they go. So three hey verbs are really three yod verbs. All of the first and second person forms have three yods. So if you go down through here and look at the second, first, skip the third, second, first, just going down there. All of them have the yods. Okay, so they're there instead of the hey. So we can recognize it as a three hey verb. The dagesh linne drops out after a vowel drops out. And so let's look at, for instance, the second masculine singular. We have banita or banita. I was emphasizing the subformative, but the accent. I accidentally do that sometimes if I'm trying to accent or emphasize a subformative. I'll miss the real accent from the accent mark. But this is banita, and so we have this Hirik yod in there. Because that's a long vowel, the dagesh drops out of the tav. That's an example. And then third person requires a closer look. Actually, we're going to take a closer look at all these. So first of all, the first and second person forms have a three yod. The vowel with the hirik, I'm sorry, the vowel with the yod is a hirik, becomes a hirik yod. So we have banita. We just did that. Okay, then dagesh linne after the dagesh linne after a vowel drops out. And so hirik yod is a long vowel, and the subformatives lose their dageshes. The tav with the dagesh, the tav without the dagesh. Let's see, we see that also. I pointed it out in the second masculine singular, but if you drop down 3 lines from the bottom and see, well, actually, the next to last and the third to last, benitem and beniten. Now, in that case, the subformative is the accented syllable. We see the loss of the dagesh because the hirik yod vowel. So we lose a dagesh right after a vowel, long vowel. Now, the third person forms are going to be a little bit more to look at here. So we have third person masculine and feminine singular, and then we have the third person plural. So those three. The 3FS has a Comet's Hay ending. This is not part of the 3-letter root. What we have instead is that the hay has been replaced by a feminine tav, which we've seen that happen with like Torah, back when we were studying nouns in chapter 4, and we see that it would be Torat. You would sometimes get the tav in there instead of the hay. And that's what happened. The hay became the feminine tav. We still have the Comet's Hay. That's the subformative. The subformative the subformative is the same. So then in the 3FS, the third feminine singular, yes, I already said all that. The hay. All right, I'm just catching up with my reading, catching up with what I've already told you. So the hay becomes a tav, that feminine tav. And then the third common plural form has lost the hirik yod. You can't have why? Because you can't have 2 vowels in a row. And so we just have banu instead of baniu. You just don't do that in Hebrew. Baniu, 2 vowels in a row. So we just have, it drops out and we have banu. But it's no problem still to see that shurik ending and recognize that as a third common plural. All right. With that, we will go on to vocabulary. So we've covered up through 14.7. So we'll start with 14.8. We'll look at geminates and doubly weak verbs and biconsonantals next lesson. So let's go ahead and go. Oh, well, on our way, we haven't covered everything, but if you look at the big chart at the top, right above the vocabulary, page 151, big chart at the top. If you just quickly scan through here, go across the first row, across the first row, and you can see those are all third masculine singulars. There's no subformatives. Go to the next one. Comet's A, Comet's A, Comet's A, Comet's A, Comet's A, Comet's A. all the way across, third feminine singular. Next row, second masculine singular, all have ta, 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 ta. You might not have the Dagesh, but you still see the ta there. And then we see the next row is going to be second feminine singular. And we see the tav and the shva at the end most of the time. Sometimes the shva is gone, like in the three aleph, and the three hey, the geminate, which we haven't covered the geminates and biconsonantals. But you can see that by and large, those are going to be the only really tricky ones. Go down to the first common singular, the next one, T, 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 all the way across. You may not have a Dagesh, but you can still see the T. If you memorize the suffirmatives, it really is not hard. Concentrate on what is the same, and then you can deduce what happened to everything else. And so anyway, I just want to point that out. Now let's go ahead and go on to the vocabulary. First word is bow. Bow means to enter or to go or to come. Probably more come and enter, probably the go-to. Notice that it says bring for the HI. That's the he feel stem, which is the causative stem. So if you cause something to come, you're bringing it. So that's why it says bring. It's because you're causing it to come. We'll talk more about that when we get to he feel. But bow, it's usually come or enter. Bana, that was one of the words we were just looking at. That means to build. Yalad it looks like yelad as in child. Well, yalad is a verb, and that is birthing. That's to bear a child. Yare is to fear. Yarad is to go down. The Jordan River is actually based off of this stem, Yardain. You have that yarad in the stem, that stem in the Jordan, because it goes down from the Sea of Galilee, which is already what 200 and some feet below sea level, and it goes on down to the Dead Sea, which is even farther below sea level. So it does go down or descend. Yarad, lakach. Lakach is to take. Moot. Moot is not moot. Moot. That's spelled differently. Moot is to die. Nafal is he fell. Nasa means to lift or carry. And sometimes it can even be used for forgiven or something like that. That's going to be based off context. But if you think of NASA, of course, when I was a kid, NASA was that was the agency doing all the space stuff. Now we have private industries doing space stuff. But if you think of NASA sending rockets into space, carrying satellites up into orbit, that kind of thing, lifting and carrying, NASA, can be a memory device. Avar is to pass over. Allah is to go up. Ahmad is to stand. Kum is to arise. Notice again in the he feel, if you cause it to arise, you're establishing it. So that's why am I telling you these things? It's because when we actually get to he feel, you go, oh, I know what that is. Bruce has already used that example a bunch of times. Okay. Kara means to call. He called, but note it's also used when somebody reads something out loud or just reads it. Kara is used for that. And there's some other words that are like this, that like meet, sometimes meeting somebody. We won't worry about those yet. Those are lesser used words, but kara means to call. Seem is to put, and shuv is to return. And those are all verbs. And so the other words we have are po. Po means here, as opposed to sham. Sham is there. Po is here. I'm not sure if we've had sham or not. And then rock. It's usually something like only. I probably would lead with only. Sometimes it could be still or something else. But or however, as they have it here. Any questions on the vocabulary? Okay, then for for homework, it's a little bit more difficult to list out here. So it's not as straightforward because we're not done with chapter 14. So if you haven't got the call perfect paradigm memorized, you need to memorize it, whether you memorize the one on 13.5 on page 131 or you use the reordered version that I used and memorized. Whichever one works for you, do that one. and be able to recognize it when you see the T ending. You know that's first common singular, or ta ending, and you know that's second masculine singular. So be able to recognize those. Of course, vocabulary, and then when you go to the workbook, there'll be some weak verbs that you're not going to recognize because we haven't done all of them yet. Or if you read ahead and you understand what the book is telling you, you can go ahead and do as many as you can. And the next time we meet, we'll try to go over the rest of the weak verbs and finish chapter 14. Um, but do what you can, and if it's something that you don't recognize, don't worry about it. We'll go over those next time. And then continue to review the differences. Look at these big charts that Pratico and Van Pelt have put in the book, where you can compare down the line and see, mostly it stays pretty much the same, and the things that aren't the same, there's reasons why it makes sense, why we can recognize it's a weak verb. Focus on what stays the same and recognizing that's formative. That would be the chief goal in this. It's good to know about the morphology. It's good to know what happens to the words, why schwas disappear, or why letters drop out, or why the hey becomes a yod. All that's important. But the main thing is to make sure you get all the stuff formatives of the call perfect. Okay, any questions? All right, then, we are done.